Thank you very much. The 8,362nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The agenda for this meeting is maintenance of international peace and security, non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The agenda is hereby adopted. I am honored to be here today to chair this meeting of the United Nations Security Council. It is also my privilege to welcome the distinguished heads of state, heads of government, ministers, and other leaders and representatives here with us. Thank you. I also wish to warmly welcome Secretary General Antonio Guterres for joining us. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. The Security Council will now consider item 2 of the agenda. I will make a statement in my capacity as President of the United States of America. It is a great honor to be here today at this UN Security Council briefing to discuss a matter of urgent importance concerning and countering the proliferation of deadly chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them. The nations of the world have long recognized that certain weapons are so dangerous and can inflict so much suffering that all of us have a vital interest in preventing their further development, spread, and use. Since my inauguration, the United States has taken bold action to confront these sinister threats. Many of us are rightly focused on the dangers of nuclear weapons, but we must never forget the risk posed by biological and chemical weapons. The United States was one of the first nations to unilaterally renounce the use of biological weapons. And since World War I, we have led international efforts against the scourge of chemical warfare. Most recently in Syria, we have twice imposed severe consequences on the Assad regime for using chemical weapons against innocent civilians. I want to thank Prime Minister May and President Macron for their country's close partnership in those efforts last April. The Syrian regime's butchery is enabled by Russia and Iran. The Iranian regime exports violence, terror, and turmoil. It illicitly procures sensitive items to advance its ballistic missile program and proliferates these missiles all across the Middle East. The regime is the world's leading sponsor of terror and fuels conflict across the region and far beyond. A regime with this track record must never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon. For this reason, I announced earlier this year that the United States would withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. This horrible one-sided deal allowed Iran to continue its path towards a bomb and gave the regime a cash lifeline when they needed it the most. They were in big, big trouble. They needed cash. We gave it to them. In the years since the deal was signed, Iran's aggression only increased. The regime used new funds from the deal to support terrorism, build nuclear-capable missiles, and foment chaos. Following America's withdrawal, the United States began reimposing nuclear-related sanctions on Iran. All U.S. nuclear-related sanctions will be in full force by early November. They will be in full force. After that, the United States will pursue additional sanctions, tougher than ever before, to counter the entire range of Iran's malign conduct. Any individual or entity who fails to comply with these sanctions will face severe consequences. I ask all members of the Security Council to work with the United States to ensure the Iranian regime changes its behavior and never acquires a nuclear bomb. With all of this said, I want to thank Iran, Russia, and Syria for, at my very strong urging and request, substantially slowing down their attack on Idlib province and the 3 million people who live there in order to get 35,000 targeted terrorists. Get the terrorists, but I hope the restraint continues. The world is watching. Thank you also to Turkey for helping to negotiate restraint. Anything the USA can do to help resolve this problem in order to save perhaps even hundreds of thousands of lives, maybe more, we are willing and able. We are available to help. In my remarks yesterday to the United Nations General Assembly, I laid out my administration's commitment to building a more just and peaceful future. Regrettably, we found that China has been attempting to interfere in our upcoming 2018 election, coming up in November, against my administration. They do not want me or us to win because I am the first president ever to challenge China on trade. And we are winning on trade. We are winning at every level. We don't want them to meddle or interfere in our upcoming election. As I also mentioned yesterday, we have seen the results of historic efforts to open new pathways to peace on the North Korean Peninsula, and that's something we are extremely proud of. I am pleased to say that North Korea has not conducted a missile test since last November. It has not conducted a nuclear test since last September. And the hostages have been returned to us, and very importantly, the remains of American heroes are now returning home. In June, I held a historic summit with Chairman Kim Jong-un in Singapore, where he reaffirmed his commitment to complete denuclearization. Last week, Chairman Kim reiterated that commitment to President Moon at their third summit and to me in a very strong letter form. I think we will make a deal. But unfortunately, to ensure this progress continues, we must enforce existing UN Security Council resolutions until denuclearization occurs. However, we have detected that some nations are already violating these UN sanctions. This includes illegal ship-to-ship transfers, which must end immediately. The safety of the Korean Peninsula, the region, and the world depends on full compliance with UN Security Council resolutions. Very, very important. But most importantly, I believe that Chairman Kim Jong-un, a man I have gotten to know and like, wants peace and prosperity for North Korea. Many things are happening behind the scenes, away from the media, which nobody knows. But they are happening nevertheless, and they are happening in a very positive way. So I think you will have some very good news coming from North Korea in the coming months and years. I also very much appreciate what President Moon of South Korea had to say about me last night in television interviews. Working with President Moon has been my great honor. And likewise, working with President Xi of China and Prime Minister Abe of Japan has been a pleasure and an honor. Each of us follows in the footsteps of countless world leaders, diplomats, and public servants who came here to the United Nations with the same noble goal: to build a future worthy of the patriots, true patriots, who sacrificed their lives for our nation and for our future. To be successful, we need a commitment of every nation represented in this chamber. Acting together, we can replace the horrors of war with the blessings of safety and the beautiful promise of peace. Thank you very much. I now resume my function as President of the Security Council and give the floor to the President of France.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Donald, dear colleagues, Secretary General, distinguished ministers, dear friends, I would like to first of all thank the U.S. Presidency of the Security Council. Thank you for having brought us here today to discuss the serious threats to international peace and security, which are represented indeed by the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery. I would like to thank the Secretary General for being present with us here today. The first issue on here that comes to my mind when we consider the divisions, frankly, that we have had in the past year on such issues, for example, as a nuclear issue or the chemical weapons used by the Syrian regime, is the following question: what is it that we, member states of the Security Council, can do together? The non-proliferation regime, which organizes the control of new nuclear weapons in order to limit the danger of nuclear war, or which places an absolute ban on certain weapons and does this to ensure that our people never experience the horrors of being gassed or bacteriological attacks. This is a relatively recent construction, and it came into maturity in the 1990s. And it was the result of the tragedies of the 20th century, the firm determination of our predecessors, of their vision of the good of humankind and their spirit of responsibility. And this edifice they constructed is born by mutual concessions, interdependence, and mutual trust that we have built together. In a word, it is based on a multilateral approach to security. Our responsibility, and I believe in it very deeply today, is that we owe this to our people. What we owe to them is to preserve and strengthen this regime at the time when it is being seriously tested. And member states of the Council have to be exemplary in this regard. And in my view, on this issue and many others, we have to stand together. And we were together, remarkably so, on the issue of North Korea. And last time it was in December 2017 when we passed Resolution 2397. The way of managing this crisis, and this was just recalled by the President of the United States, has gone through a new stage thanks to his initiative to have a direct dialogue with the chairman of the Workers' Party of Korea. And we welcome and support these efforts, as well as the efforts made in this regard by South Korea. At no point should the Security Council lose sight of the fact that North Korea continues representing a nuclear and ballistic threat for the region and for the world. We expect for the Pyongyang regime specific actions showing that they genuinely determined to dismantle their nuclear and ballistic program, and to do so in a way which is comprehensive, verifiable, and irreversible. As we await such gestures, such actions, our dialogue has to be accompanied by rigorous implementation of the sanctions decided upon by the Council. And on this, we are united. We were also united on the issue of Iran when we passed Resolution 2231, but that was in 2015. Since then, the pathways of the signatories of the JCPOA have diverged. But And let me repeat it here, we still, all of us here, I'm convinced, retain the same objective in mind, namely preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and guaranteeing strict international control on the peaceful use of their nuclear program. The JCPOA is imperfect, but it is a decisive step in that exact direction. A serious crisis of confidence was opened by a reimposition of extraterritorial sanctions by the United States, but Tehran continues abiding by its nuclear obligations. Well, this situation has to be countered by the respect of all of the provisions of JCPOA and its resolutions by all members of the UN, and not just by France, Germany, and the UK. We also have to go further than the current framework. And I've already stated the same a year ago. And that is why I agree the goals recalled by the President of the United States, even if we can disagree on the methods as regards JCPOA. But I think that we need to build together a long-term strategy in order to manage this crisis. And it cannot boil down to just sanctions and containment. We need to have the basis for new negotiations, and created first by the framework we create for the Iranian nuclear issue beyond 2025 and 2030, and on the issue of the increase of Iran of the scope and the accuracy of their ballistic missiles. So we have to frame their ballistic issue, secondly, and thirdly, the regional stability. It's all of these components that can be part of an international strategy in order to reduce the dangers for the region and also attain the goal that we all want, namely that Iran does not ever obtain a nuclear weapon. We were also united on the issue of eliminating Syrian chemical weapons. This was in Resolution 2118, but that was in 2013. Since then, the threats for the credibility of the ban have accumulated. The reappearance of chemical weapons during the offensives by the Syrian regime at the time when Damascus had adhered to the convention banning that and declared their program did not encounter the needed determination from the Council. Daesh, as far as they're concerned, have used those weapons in Syria and Iraq. And in February 2017, in Malaysia, a member of the North Korea leader's family was assassinated with the use of a neurotoxin, VX. And this year, it was on the United Kingdom territory and therefore in the European Union that another neurotoxin was used, and this resulted in a death and an injury for 4 other people. France recalls here that we share the British analysis, according to which there is no other plausible explanation here other than that the responsibility is with Russia, and it's up to Russia to take all the necessary measures in order to make cease this threat. We launched on the 23rd January 2018 an international partnership against the impunity of using chemical weapons. And all of the states are invited to join this initiative. We had to act also, and I would like to thank here President Trump and Prime Minister May. We had to act there together with the US and the UK against this Syrian chemical capacity. We work towards strengthening the Organization on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons by creating a new mechanism for inquiry and attribution, which is an indispensable tool. Mr. President, France will work ceaselessly for the unity of this Council on the issues of non-proliferation. We have to remain united because in the recent years, every time when we were not united, it was to the detriment of our principles and our collective effectiveness. It's an issue of our legitimacy as permanent and non-permanent members. We also have to be united because the dissemination of technologies can lead to new threats to peace, and this concerns us directly. The development of intercontinental missiles by North Korea is something that we need to worry about. Up until now, it was only very few states who had these kinds of weapons, and this placed on them very special responsibility. Now, in future, if we do not have sufficient control of that, and if North Korea proliferates, how many other countries will have this weapon? In the Middle East, the ballistic assistance provided to Hezbollah and to Houthis is a new and alarming development. It has to stop before they further destabilize a region which is already tense. Fighting Daesh confirmed that the terrorist groups are interested in the weapons of mass destruction. The threat of nuclear or radiological terrorism has not disappeared, despite the leadership that has been shown by the United States here with the summit conducted on nuclear security. France calls that we continue international cooperation here. It's more necessary now than ever. Mr. President, we will continue strictly abiding by our commitments under the international non-proliferation regime and will continue strengthening the various institutions which form its backbone. In particular, we will continue to support the efforts made by the United Nations and its experts and will bring the issue of combating nuclear, chemical, biological, and ballistic proliferation during our presidency of G7 in 2019. And for this, I call for our unity and the spirit of responsibility, because the non-proliferation regime is the backbone of our system of collective security. We kept building it decade after decade. It's still young. It requires our mobilization, our spirit of responsibility, and our unity. I thank you.
I thank the President of France for his statement. Thank you very much. I now call on the President of Poland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Distinguished Mr. President, distinguished Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, heads of the states, prime ministers, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, the current security situation is not encouraging. Tensions at the global and regional level threaten the existing international order, including non-proliferation and arms control regimes. In fact, we have been witnessing their progressive decomposition. They have been regularly challenged by non-state actors, but what is of even more concern, they are also being undermined by individual states. Before I address the problem of nuclear weapons, I first would like to draw your attention to another type of weapons of mass destruction that made their way back to the top of the global agenda. I'm referring to chemical weapons. Let me be clear. Every use of a chemical weapon is a crime. It does not matter whether it's used on a mass scale by undemocratic regimes against their own people to secure their power, or it's used in a state terrorist manner against individuals abroad on whom a certain state wants to take revenge. And if it is a crime, it means that the principal obligation of the international community is defined by the rule-based order. Criminals must be brought to justice. No single act of use of the chemical weapon can be left unanswered, since it undermines not only the basic sense of justice, but also leads to the erosion of the non-proliferation and disarmament regimes and, in consequence, threatens the security of all of us. Brutal attacks, directed mostly against civilians, all have the same aim: to intimidate the international community. The community of the UN cannot accept such methods. Our inaction will only encourage perpetrators. I hope that the finalization of the new EU sanction mechanism, completed in the framework of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, will allow us to exercise appropriate pressure on current and future perpetrators, as well as deter them from these unacceptable actions. We all hoped to have chemical weapons effectively banned by the Chemical Weapons Convention. we must stand firmly behind our own rules and norms, which are the pillars of the international order. In this context, let me mention that, as in the previous years, Poland will introduce in the United Nations General Assembly a draft resolution on the implementation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. It is of great importance to preserve the integrity of this regime. Therefore, we call on all member states to ensure a strong, clear, and united message of support of the whole international community for the integrity of the Chemical Weapons Convention and the efforts of the Organization for the Prohibition of the Chemical Weapons. The second issue I would like to highlight is the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Permit me to make 3 points regarding this matter. Firstly, we all know that nuclear weapons cannot be brought on the free market. Therefore, every act of proliferation of these weapons is a failure of both the international community and the rule-based world order. And we must remember that it always involves not only the state that develops nuclear capacity, but also those who provide it with means to achieve it, namely technology, materials, and resources. It's of utmost importance for every agreement that aims at controlling nuclear programs to guarantee that they are used solely for peaceful purposes. We have an obligation to evaluate those agreements against the purposes and to act accordingly. We should not turn our heads back from those who act against the Non-Proliferation Treaty by providing means to develop nuclear weapon capacity or assist in other ways in developing it. Good and effective export controls mechanism should be upheld by all countries involved in nuclear, chemical, and biological trade for peaceful purposes in order to maintain the appropriate control level of dual-use goods and to make non-proliferation effort more effective. In this regard, we welcome the International Atomic Energy Agency's effort to strictly monitor and verify Iran's commitments. Let me also use this opportunity to commend the vital role the agency plays in the non-proliferation area. The agency's system of safeguards is a fundamental component of the nuclear non-proliferation regime and plays an indispensable role in the implementation of the NPT. Secondly, I would like to welcome the prospect of the process of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We have seen some encouraging developments, such as the inter-Korean summits and the meeting of Kim Jong-un with the President Donald Trump. These led to the stopping of the missile and nuclear tests. And I would like to stress, Mr. President, that this is in tremendous measure your and President Moon's great achievement and merit. So thank you very much. However, the decisive steps are yet to be made. The lasting peace will not be achieved without the denuclearization of the North Korea in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner. Until then, the international community must remain united in maintaining real and consistent pressure on the North Korea, including by upholding UN sanctions regime. Thirdly, for the credibility of international community, it's vital to stand firmly behind duties and obligations we took in our shoulders. In that context, let me sadly reflect on the concerning developments of security situation in our region, Central and Eastern Europe. Only in the last few years, we have witnessed a clear breach of the Budapest Memorandum that guaranteed territorial integrity of Ukraine in exchange of its peaceful and voluntary denuclearization. We have also heard about the use of nuclear weapons to end conventional conflicts. Equally alarming was the deployment of a dual-capable means of delivery close to our borders. All these actions have significantly contributed to the deterioration of the security environment. Ladies and gentlemen, what should be our response to the challenges I have just listed? First, the full and firm implementation of the well-established and widely recognized treaties and norms of the international law. Second, support and full confidence for the work of international mechanisms responsible for preventing of the use of weapons of mass destruction. Finally, proactive and constructive engagement in initiatives which aim at fighting with proliferation efforts and promoting transparency and verification. In 2018, my country assumed the chairmanship of the second preparatory committee for the 2020 review conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and chaired the Hague Code of Conduct against ballistic missile proliferation. Our efforts have been focused on strengthening these regimes, their universalization, securing the widespread and credible verification mechanism, implementation of good practices, as well as tightening the international cooperation. These actions constitute long-term objectives of the Polish security policy. In conclusion, let me stress once again that non-proliferation is a collective effort to uphold the security architecture which we have built for decades and to prevent the nightmares recurring uses of weapons of mass destruction. We need full commitment of all of us, without any exception, to observe all norms and obligations in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I now give the floor to the President of Equatorial Guinea. Please. Thank
Gracias.
Thank you, President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is for me a pleasure and an honor to address for the first time in person this forum on behalf of and in representation of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. We thank the United States of America for having convened this open debate this morning, and we congratulate the United States on their excellent work as President of the Council for the month of September. Disarmament is one of the longest-standing goals of the United Nations. Indeed, it was the subject of the very first Security Council resolution on the 25th of January 1946, when the Security Council adopted Resolution 1 of the United Nations Security Council, enshrined in Article 47 of the Charter of the United Nations. 72 years have elapsed since the adoption of the aforementioned resolution by the Security Council, and today the world is once again caught up in an arms race, which has led many states to feel themselves compelled to acquire a range of weapons of all kinds for their defense, and more specifically has led them feeling compelled to obtain weapons of mass destruction in some instances. Nuclear arsenals do not just serve to exacerbate tensions between states and to hinder the drive for peace, but they also put in jeopardy the very continued existence of humankind. Our country, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, does not possess, nor does it intend ever to acquire, weapons of mass destruction, and we have adopted measures to guarantee the strict and full implementation of the commitments and obligations that we bear to the international community in the sphere of non-proliferation. we have ratified the African Treaty for the Establishment of a Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone in our continent, a treaty that is better known as the Treaty of Pelindamba. The promotion of nuclear disarmament ought to be a priority, if not indeed the priority, on the agenda of the international community. In 2 years, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, which entered into force in 1970, and which is an international instrument that made it possible to halt the spread and proliferation of nuclear weapons to those countries that, as of that date, were non-nuclear weapon states. Sadly, the NPT did not succeed in achieving the elimination by nuclear weapon states of their existing arsenals which they still maintain. There has always been a deep-rooted resistance by nuclear weapon states to complying with the provisions of the NPT, which apply to the implementation of nuclear disarmament. The costs borne by nuclear powers to maintain these arsenals, and in some instances to modernize these arsenals, far outstrip the budget of all nations of the African Union taken together. The amount spent on these nuclear weapons is greater than the budget of all of our nations. President, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction poses a threat to international peace and security, and it undermines the Security Council in its role of working to prevent the spread and production of such weapons of mass destruction. To counter the proliferation and use of weapons of mass destruction, it is vital to pursue the implementation of and compliance with those international treaties related to non-proliferation, as well as to ensure implementation of and compliance with Security Council Resolution 1540 of 2004. There is also a need to lend support to the Proliferation Security Initiative, to the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism. Action is also needed to ban any test of nuclear weapons, to share information between states and international organizations. There is also an urgent and pressing need to implement systems of joint verification, inspection, and oversight for arsenals and research facilities of this type of weapons, and such verification should be undertaken by the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs in partnership with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this verification, inspection, and oversight work should include securing such weapons and ensuring their destruction. In addition, there is a pressing need to pursue negotiations with nuclear weapon possessor states in order to ensure that they rule out effectively and genuinely the option of using nuclear weapons. Steps must also be taken to ensure that their nuclear arsenals are secured, and the rights of all parties to make peaceful use of nuclear energy must be recognized and upheld. President, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea is alarmed because the United Nations seems to be in a paradoxical situation. There seems to be a disconnect between steps taken here in this House and actions taken by some states claiming their sovereignty, which is undermining what should be an action of partnership and solidarity. Some 2 days ago, we had an extraordinary summit to remember the extraordinary African leader Nelson Mandela, and we all spoke out to reject confrontation and war, to set aside disputes, to live up to his legacy. And in living up to the legacy of Nelson Mandela, we expressed the hope that we might be able to live in a world of peace, security, development, and well-being for all. However, it seems that many states have chosen rather to pursue the path of arms and weapons, which runs directly counter to the noble and lofty aspirations of the Mandela Summit, a summit which we all welcomed and all participated in. It is possible to ban weapons of mass destruction and to render their use unthinkable. All that is needed is the necessary will and determination of all parties. The Republic of Equatorial Guinea voices its determination to continue working towards the negotiation and adoption of legally binding instruments that will lead to nuclear disarmament in an effective, irreversible, and verifiable way in order to achieve the objective of the complete elimination of all nuclear weapons. The international community of nations should also be worried by the potential humanitarian consequences and the global impact of any accidental or intentional nuclear detonation. And the international community of nations should cooperate on the level of international security to prevent non-state actors from getting their hands on the resources necessary for them to be able to pursue nuclear terrorism. President, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea is persuaded of the usefulness of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes and used under the supervision of the IAEA. I conclude this statement delivered on behalf of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea by sharing with you that in our region, our continent, Africa, there are not, nor have there ever been used, weapons of mass destruction. What has caused enormous loss of life and bloodshed in our continent is the trafficking in weapons, terrorism, and the conflicts that have racked and left a stain on our continent. For this region, I would urgently request you to support the African Union in its noble objective of financing for peacekeeping operations led by the African Union on a case-by-case basis. I appeal directly to the members of the Security Council, asking them to lend their support for a financing mechanism for peace and security operations led under mandates of the Security Council, given that so doing would contribute to international peace and security, which is the principal goal of this august body, the Security Council of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I now give the floor to the President of Bolivia. Thank you.
El presidente de Estados
President of the United States of America, my brother Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, fellow presidents, brothers and sisters of the Security Council. The presidency of the Security Council has convened the members of this body to a discussion on the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction today. Bolivia hails from a region which has been duly declared nuclear weapon-free for more than half a century now. For this reason, I think I am in a position to recall Article number 1 of the Treaty prohibiting the use of nuclear weapons, which states that each state party commits to never and under no circumstances developing, testing, producing, manufacturing, acquiring in any other way, possessing or stockpiling nuclear weapons or other nuclear devices. I call upon all states around this table to sign up to ratify, and to immediately implement this provision, and indeed all the provisions of said treaty. This is the best way of avoiding the catastrophic possibility of the use of weapons of this nature. This is a moral imperative and a duty that we owe to future generations. Brothers and sisters of the world, the member states of the United Nations are obliged to comply with the core purposes and principles of the Charter of 1945. Above all, we are obliged to abide by the principle of resolving international disputes through the use of peaceful settlement mechanisms. None of these mechanisms presupposes the use of weapons of any kind. Quite the contrary. This is a call for negotiation, diplomacy, dialogue, and legal settlement. And these are the principles that should guide the actions of countries whenever faced with a disagreement or dispute. Bolivia is convinced that only through using these peaceful means will we be able to build fairer societies and societies willing to shoulder their shared responsibilities. We have to be capable of putting behind us and leaving on the pages of history books the primitive use of weapons to attack other peoples. I would like to highlight as an example the contribution made by the International Court of Justice, the primary judicial body of the United Nations system, which has been able to effectively resolve disputes between states in various parts of the world and states faced with different situations and complaints. Brothers and sisters, we are convinced that it is crucial to have a discussion not just on the effects, but above all on the structural and root causes that lead to war, and on the genuine and true motivations of the assaults on international peace, security, and justice that we are seeing. Let us take the example of Iran, a country which has been referred to this morning. In 1953, the United States financed, planned, and implemented a coup d'etat against a democratically elected government, which, in exercise of its legitimate sovereignty, nationalized its oil production, wresting it from the hands of an Anglo-US company. After that, for many decades, the United States supported an authoritarian government which allowed the profits from oil production to line the pockets of transnational companies. This situation endured until the revolution of 1979. And now that Iran has retaken control of its own resources, it is once again the victim of a US siege. Bolivia categorically condemns the unilateral actions imposed by the government of the United States of America against Iran. Likewise, we condemn the fact that the United States has withdrawn from the JCPOA, hiding behind pretexts to continue its policy of interference and meddling in the internal affairs of this brother country, Iran. Brothers and sisters of the Security Council, we wish to refer to the region of the Middle East, a region rich in natural resources, but thus ripe to be, as it is, affected by invasion, war, and unjustified aggression that continue to cause pain and suffering for the peoples of the Middle East. This region of the world has been the setting for the three most egregious acts of aggression committed during the 21st century. The first act of aggression to which I refer is the illegal invasion of Iraq, based on the lie that that country possessed weapons of mass destruction. This invasion led to more than 1 million deaths. The second act of aggression is the overthrow of the government of Libya, which led to tens of thousands of deaths, whilst pretending that it was for humanitarian reasons. As a consequence, it has triggered serious political instability and unleashed a humanitarian crisis across the north of Africa. The third act of aggression to which I refer is the civil war in Syria, which, over the last 8 years, has cost the lives of more than 500,000 people. This war is the direct result of the interference and of the financing of armed groups and terrorist organizations who have pitted themselves against the Syrian government. Brothers and sisters, over the last few months, the United States has once again demonstrated its contempt for international law, for multilateralism, and for the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Each time that the United States invades nations, launches missiles, or finances regime change, it does so behind a propaganda campaign which incessantly repeats the message that it is acting in the cause of justice, freedom, and democracy, in the cause of human rights or for humanitarian reasons. I would like to say to you frankly and openly here, in no way is the United States interested in upholding democracy. If such were the case, it would not have financed coup d'etat and supported dictators. It would not have threatened with military intervention democratically elected governments, as it has done with Venezuela. The United States could not care less about human rights nor justice. If this were the case, it would have signed the international conventions and treaties for the protection of human rights. It would not have threatened the investigation mechanisms of the International Criminal Court, nor would it promote the use of torture, nor would it have walked away from the Human Rights Council, and nor would it have separated migrant children from their families, nor put them in cages. The United States is not interested in multilateralism. If it were interested in multilateralism, it would not have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement or given the cold shoulder to the Global Compact on migrant. It would not have launched unilateral attacks, nor have taken decisions such as illegally declaring Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. This contempt for multilateralism is motivated by the thirst of the United States for geopolitical control and for the seizing of natural resources. Brothers and sisters, in light of the aforementioned situations, I would like to hail those countries, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, China, and Russia, who have held firm in defense of the nuclear agreement signed with Iran. We praise also those countries who have not abandoned the Paris Agreement, those countries that defend the principles of sovereign equality of states, those countries that uphold the principle of non-interference in domestic affairs, those countries that respect international law and respect those commitments freely entered into and who defend multilateralism. Our congratulations to those countries. The responsibility of our generation is to hand over a fairer and more secure world to the following generation. We will only achieve this dream if we work together to consolidate a multipolar world, a world with common rules that are respected by and defended from all the threats ranged against the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now give the floor to His Excellency from Peru.
Buenos días.
Good morning. I would like to greet personally President Donald Trump, and my greetings also go to the dignitaries and high officials present at this morning's meeting. Peru welcomes the convening of this high-level meeting to focus the attention of the world and of the Security Council on the need to halt in its tracks the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their delivery systems. A particularly apt message, as today marks the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Throughout its history, this Council has stood united in the fight against the proliferation of nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons, as well as their delivery systems, and has done so commensurate with this body's chief responsibility of maintaining international peace and security, a task conferred upon us as a body by the Charter of the United Nations. The action of this Council is underpinned by the progressive development of international regimes and systems based in turn on a range of binding instruments adopted by this organization and by its member states. The most recent of these instruments is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons of 2017, which we hope will one day be ratified by all countries, and in particular by those who currently possess nuclear arsenals. This is no mere flight of fancy. Thanks to the Tlatelolco Treaty, Latin America and the Caribbean is already a nuclear weapon-free zone. And this has been a key building block in our march towards making our region one of peace. Peru, as a staunch supporter of the non-proliferation regime and architecture, fulfills to the letter the obligations established in the respective relevant instruments, and we also comply to the letter with the decisions of the Security Council contained in its relevant resolutions. And as a member of this Security Council, we actively promote strict compliance by all with said provisions and decisions. We believe that guaranteeing international peace and security can only be achieved by eliminating the risk that weapons of mass destruction represent. And the best way of achieving that goal is simply by ensuring that there are no weapons of mass destruction. Thus, we wish to make clear our view that non-proliferation should go hand in hand with disarmament and with strict controls over conventional weapons. From our perspective, this entails first and foremost addressing the challenge posed by the nuclear and ballistic programs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. On this particular point, we wish to once again hail the high-level diplomacy that your administration and you personally, President Trump, have been engaged in with a view to achieving complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We believe that the validity of the nuclear non-proliferation regime should be upheld as well through compliance with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, on the Iranian nuclear program, a plan that was endorsed by this Security Council in Resolution 2231. Additionally, we regret and condemn the use of chemical weapons in the Syrian conflict, as well as in the British city of Salisbury. Against this complex backdrop, and to conclude, President, we wish to underscore the importance of diplomacy, of multilateralism, of international law, of confidence-building measures, and of universality as principles for strengthening the non-proliferation and disarmament regimes. We note that in many instances, it is the perceptions of insecurity that lead to an arms race and even to the development of new weapons and tactics of war. It is therefore necessary, in our view, to address these perceptions to counter the proliferation and to boost disarmament, investing in cooperation, trade, and international development. Because technology should be wielded in the service of peace and progress rather than for inhumanity and destruction. Thank you very much.
Very much. Appreciate it. I'd like to now give the floor to the Vice President of Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegations, I would like to first of all thank the U.S. presidency for having convened this high-level discussion on the issue of the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. I would like to also welcome your presence here, Your Excellency, the presence of heads of states and governments, eminent personalities, which make this meeting all the more significant, and the topic thereof is of great importance for our world. Mr. President, the rapid development of nuclear and ballistic weapons programs resulted in the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. These weapons feed violence and conflicts. They threaten the stability of entire regions, and thus make the issue of non-proliferation into an issue of survival for humankind. Indeed, and despite all of the efforts that have been deployed by the international community in order to achieve a nuclear weapons-free world, nonetheless, we still are under common threat from these weapons as well as biological and chemical weapons. As of today, there are 14,500 nuclear weapons in the world. These weapons bring in the risk of nuclear conflict, which would have irreversible humanitarian and environmental consequences. And this is a real challenge for our organization. We also deplore the trend some states show to invest great amounts in modernizing their nuclear weapons, but putting very little into the elimination of such weapons. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is considered as a cornerstone of the non-proliferation regime, is today being severely tested, and there is a significant divergence of views during the review conferences, which take place every 5 years. The non-compliance by some states with their commitments on disarmament and non-proliferation is a serious risk for security and could lead to the non-state actors acquiring weapons of mass destruction. The issue of the Iranian nuclear issue, the situation in the Middle East, in Syria with allegations of chemical weapons used, the use of ballistic missiles in Yemen, and the issue of the Korean Peninsula nuclearization, real difficult Gordian knots and real sources of concern for international community. These situations are such that they compel us to place the issue of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction amongst our highest priorities. Given this situation, the Security Council, which is to maintain international peace and security, has to continue shouldering responsibility in the area of non-proliferation. In this context, Cote d'Ivoire calls for the implementation of the relevant resolutions of Security Council and the implementation of the various legal instruments, those which are covering the areas of disarmament and non-proliferation. We invite, therefore, member states to discharge, with the support of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, discharge their international obligations which stem from the convention, which bans the development, manufacturing, stockpiling, the use of chemical weapons and calls for their destruction. In this context, I'd like to say that Cote d'Ivoire is party to all of the treaties and important conventions in the area of non-proliferation, and we incorporated into our national laws all of the commitments which flow from national legal instruments. In the disarmament area, the step-by-step approach did not result in the desired effect, and we therefore call those states which have nuclear weapons to consider a new, more effective approach. Mr. President, we welcome the adoption on the 7th July 2017 of the treaty banning nuclear weapons. They underscore that it's important to implement it rapidly. Outer space, which is considered, and rightly so, as a common good for humankind, warrants our constant attention and requires an urgent adoption of an international legally binding instrument in order to prevent an arms race in space and make sure it does not become militarized. Further, we underscore the need for the international community to have a more binding instrument in the area of biological and toxin weapons. We also would like to express a wish for a universal and non-discriminatory instrument in order to provide a security guarantee for non-nuclear states. On chemical weapons, we call for a universalization of the Convention of Chemical Weapons and the implementation of resolutions 1540 of 2004 and Resolution 2325 of 2016. In this regard, the mandate conferred on OPCW during the special meeting on the 26th and 27th July in The Hague, the mandate to identify and to bring to justice the perpetrators of chemical weapons attacks could greatly contribute towards settling the issues related to the allegations of chemical weapons use. We call on the Security Council to stand united on this issue. Mr. President, as regards the Iran nuclear issue, my delegation supports the implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is considered to be overall satisfactory. In this regard, we would like to invite the stakeholders to work out their differences over this agreement, which resulted from an extraordinary international compromise and remains to date a certain guarantee for the implementation of the NPT and helps with regional peace and stability. Mr. President, on the situation in the Korean Peninsula, Cote d'Ivoire welcomes the positive developments we have been witnessing recently. The historic meeting on the 12th of June in Singapore between Your Excellency and the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, is a major milestone in this new regional dynamic. We reiterate here our attachment to the principles of peacefully settling disputes through dialogue and talks, and we urge all of the stakeholders to reject definitively any use of military option which could lead to terrible and irreversible consequences for the planet. To conclude, we'd like to, in Cote d'Ivoire, reaffirm our attachment to multilateralism, international law, and underscore the need to assign high priority to the preservation of the non-proliferation regime, non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, their vectors, and the promotion of disarmament and arms control. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for convening this important debate. There is no greater threat to international peace and security than the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. These issues matter to every man, woman, and child around the globe. And the United Kingdom, like the other permanent members of this Council, has a special responsibility to protect the significant gains we have made in the last 70 years. Because the international community has invested huge energy into containing the horrific forces that emerged in the 20th century. The multilateral framework of treaties countering the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is one of the greatest achievements of the international community, demonstrating the value of global cooperation. It has improved all of our security. It has brought a measure of predictability and stability, and it has paved the way to arms control agreements and disarmament. When many of us around this table were born, it was feared dozens of nuclear weapons states might emerge. Instead, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons has seen a remarkable near 30 states abandon their pursuit of nuclear weapons. Global stockpiles have been reduced by close to 80% since their Cold War peak. That is true success on a truly global scale. Similar, if not greater success, has been achieved on chemical and biological weapons. Over 96% of declared stockpiles of chemical weapons have now been destroyed under international verification, and no country professes publicly to possess biological weapons. But the last 18 months have seen these hard-won gains challenged. We have seen chemical weapons used in Syria, Malaysia, and the UK. The conventions governing our nuclear compact are being picked at. Predictability and stability are declining. If we do not increase our collective efforts to preserve and build on what we have, there is a very real risk these gains will subside or fall away. The 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty is rightly perceived as the flagship of the international community's determination against nuclear proliferation. Supporting it requires leadership. Leadership of the short your administration and you personally, Mr. President, are demonstrating on DPRK, the world's most pressing nuclear threat. In meeting Kim Jong-un, you have created an historic opportunity for complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. Consensus from this Council to impose sanctions on DPRK has played no small part, but we will not continue meaningful progress towards peace on the Korean Peninsula without sustained pressure. Sanctions must be strictly enforced by all, including the DPRK's neighbours. We must stay vigilant. Ensuring non-proliferation also requires collective leadership, of the type that led to the agreement in 2015 of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. For many years, the scale and nature of Iran's nuclear program raised serious international concerns. The JCPOA was an important step forward in addressing these. It remains the best means of preventing Iran developing a nuclear weapon, and we are committed to preserving the JCPOA as long as Iran continues to abide by its obligations in full. Iran must ensure they implement their obligations fully, and to monitor Iran's compliance, we strongly support the IAEA using inspections and other monitoring provisions of the JCPOA to their full. Other aspects of Iran's policies, in particular its destabilizing regional behavior and sustained efforts to enhance its ballistic missile capability, continue to cause serious concerns. The international community, and where appropriate the Security Council, need to be ready to address this. And Iran's proliferation of missile and sophisticated military technology to groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, or, as the UN's panel of experts concluded, the Houthis in Yemen, is also not in compliance with Security Council resolutions. It risks a dangerous escalation, so we need to see further decisive action in this Council to tackle both the transit and proliferation of these technologies and increase the costs for those responsible. it is regrettable that Russia continues to prevent the Council from upholding its responsibility to stop this destabilising activity. Mr. President, nowhere are the grim consequences of the erosion of global norms on weapons of mass destruction more apparent than in Syria, where the UN has concluded that Assad's regime has repeatedly used chemical weapons, a direct assault on a near-century-old ban vital to our collective peace and security. Yet Russia has repeatedly wielded its veto to prevent the Security Council from holding the Assad regime to account, even shutting down the international body established to investigate chemical weapons use in Syria. So I welcome the decision of 150 countries in June, the largest gathering in its history, to empower the OPCW to attribute responsibility for chemical weapons attacks in Syria and to put in place arrangements for attribution for any country which requests it. And I would like to thank President Trump and President Macron for their shared determination with the UK to deter the use of chemical weapons in Syria through US, UK and French joint military action in April. These actions sent a clear message to the Assad regime. Perpetrators of chemical weapons use cannot escape identification or act with impunity. The regime's backers must use their influence to ensure chemical weapons are not used again. For there must be no doubt we will respond swiftly and appropriately if they are. The UK saw the consequences of these norms being eroded in Salisbury this year, when Russia recklessly deployed a nerve agent on our streets. The United Kingdom has presented detailed evidence, clearly laid out in charges of attempted murder and the use and possession of a chemical weapon against 2 agents of the Russian state. We have taken appropriate action with our allies, and we will continue to take the necessary steps to ensure our collective security. Russia has only sought to obfuscate through desperate fabrication. Permanent members of the UN Security Council must not attack and undermine the international non-proliferation regimes and the institutions that underpin them. All members of the Council must fulfil their responsibilities to safeguard them in support of international peace and security. It is my sincere hope that Russia will rejoin the international consensus against the use of chemical weapons and the collective effort to uphold it. If so, this Council will again be able to work together to rid the world of chemical weapons. But if not, we should leave no one in any doubt of the international community's determination to uphold international non-proliferation regimes. Not all the challenges faced by the Counterproliferation Framework come before this Council, but they are no less urgent. We need to strengthen the rules to keep pace with new technologies and more complex global supply chains. We must help every UN member to develop their capabilities and regulation and ensure they are able to make their contribution to this global effort. The quiet but essential role the United Nations plays must be at the heart of these efforts. So as UN members, we should invest the expertise and diplomatic resources necessary in the conventions. Mr. President, it was collective engagement by states across the globe that produced the Counterproliferation Framework. Even the most powerful recognized that investing in collective rules-based restraint was the only effective way of addressing national security interests and avoiding unilateral recourse to force. We cannot let the framework be undermined today by those who reject the values and disregard the rules that have kept us safe. It will take collective engagement to reinforce it in the face of today's challenges. And in this, as has always been the case, the UK will play a leading role. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I now give the floor to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year there have been several occasions when weapons of mass destruction have endangered our security, undermined international stability, and caused terrible suffering. So 2018 has made the importance of non-proliferation abundantly clear. I agree with you, Mr. President, that as politicians we are first and foremost responsible to keep our own citizens safe. And I believe that multilateral institutions play a major role where this issue is concerned. As I will say in my address to the General Assembly later today, the Kingdom of the Netherlands has always championed and will continue to champion the rules-based international order and multilateral cooperation, especially on security matters and other issues of shared concern. The multilateral cooperation requires active support from all of us, including and even especially on the issue of weapons of mass destruction. We should acknowledge the significant achievements that have been made in controlling these weapons. For 50 years now, the Non-Proliferation Treaty has kept the number of nuclear weapon possessors under 10. We can only imagine how much conflict, instability, and violence this has prevented. So I'm encouraged that the US, Russian, and British foreign ministers have underlined their continuing support for and commitment to the NPT on the occasion of its 50th anniversary. We have seen some positive steps on non-proliferation this year in relation to North Korea. The ultimate goal of our joint efforts is to ensure that North Korea abandons its nuclear ballistic missile capabilities and its programs on weapons of mass destruction. It should do this in comprehensive, verifiable, and irreversible manner. We welcome the efforts you, Mr. President, are personally making to achieve a nuclear weapon-free Korean peninsula. For we know that this problem can only be resolved peacefully. As chair of the Sanctions Committee, the Netherlands is doing everything it can to ensure that all nations fully implemented sanctions, so as to keep up the pressure on North Korea to comply with its international obligations. The Kingdom of the Netherlands believes that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 2231, remains a good example of how this Council and the international community can work hand in hand for non-proliferation. The International Atomic Energy Agency has concluded in 12 consecutive reports that Iran is abiding by its commitments under the deal. As long as this continues, we will also uphold our commitment to the deal. At the same time, we are concerned about Iran's role in the region, its ballistic missile program, and its human rights record. In particular, Iran's support for Hezbollah and the role Iran plays in Syria and Iraq and in the development of missiles by the Houthis in Yemen remain serious concerns for the Netherlands. They need to be addressed. Mr. President, the repeated use of chemical weapons is deeply alarming. It causes terrible human suffering and erodes the established international norm. There should be no impunity for any use of chemical weapons, not for the large-scale attacks in Syria, nor for the individual attacks in Malaysia and the United Kingdom. The same goes for the possible use of chemical weapons by the Syrian regime in Italy. All of us, both within and outside this Council, bear a responsibility. Because of the stalemate in this body, we have tasked the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to investigate and identify those responsible for the use of these weapons. We cannot sit back. We have to speak up, take action and firmly support the OPCW so that the perpetrators can be brought to justice. And we need to do this together. Indecisiveness by countries that claim to support the principles of disarmament and non-proliferation could ultimately have disastrous consequences. And with regard to this, the Salisbury attack, we reaffirm our confidence in the UK investigations. We welcome its bringing criminal charges as an important step towards justice. This bolsters our earlier conclusion that it is essential to hold those responsible to account. Mr. President, to conclude, the devastating consequences of the use of weapons of mass destruction underline the urgent need to take action. The use of these weapons must never become the new normal. We must prevent impunity at all costs. A legal norm can only be effective if we collectively uphold it, together, as part of a multilateral effort. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. I now give the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kuwait. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Mr. President Donald Trump, At the outset, I would like to express our satisfaction and pleasure at seeing Your Excellency preside over this summit of the Security Council. We appreciate your initiative in convening this open meeting, which confirms that you attach the utmost priority to one of the most serious threats to international peace and security, namely, weapons of mass destruction. The discussion we are having in this chamber comes at a delicate stage amidst complex circumstances facing our world today. That is especially so in the Middle East. In addition to the spread of conflicts and terrorism, we are facing the threat of use of weapons of mass destruction. The threat posed by WMDs is no longer hypothetical. We have recently witnessed the launch of ballistic missiles, the testing of nuclear weapons, and the use of chemical weapons in many places around the world. Here, I would like to reiterate Kuwait's constant and principled position on non-proliferation. Kuwait condemns the use of all weapons of mass destruction anywhere, at any time, and by any party. The use of WMDs is a grave violation of international law. The establishment of peace, security, and stability in the world cannot be achieved in the presence of such weapons. We have recently witnessed the horrors of chemical weapon attacks undertaken by state and non-state actors in Syria. Such attacks confirm that the threat of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction has not declined, despite numerous treaties and resolutions criminalizing the use of such weapons. We are following with great concern the possibility of future attacks using weapons of mass destruction, whether in Syria or elsewhere in the world. We emphasize the primary importance of unity within the Security Council in responding to the imminent danger posed by WMDs, thereby ensuring the implementation of relevant international resolutions, particularly Security Council Resolution 1540 of 2004. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is facing unprecedented attacks from ballistic missiles launched by the Houthi militias towards its territories, targeting civilian and religious sites. The State of Kuwait reiterates its strong condemnation and denunciation of the rocket attacks targeting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in particular and the region in general. We also emphasize the need for the Security Council to take action and shoulder its responsibilities in confronting the threat facing the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in order to preserve international peace and security. My delegation is fully prepared to work with you to take further measures to put an end to such attacks, which are undoubtedly linked to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. In the midst of the events the Middle East region is witnessing, the State of Kuwait remains committed to supporting all UN resolutions and welcomed the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2231 of 2015. While the Islamic Republic of Iran continues to implement the provisions of that resolution and published reports by the International Atomic Energy Agency confirms Iran's compliance with its nuclear-related obligations, we note with concern the independent UN reports that indicate Iran's continued support and financing of militias and armed groups in Arab countries. We're particularly concerned about Iran's interference in Yemen, and as the resolution adopted by the League of Arab States on the 11th of September 2018 confirms, Yemeni territories have been transformed into a launch pad for Iranian-made ballistic missiles targeting Yemen's neighbors and threatening maritime navigation in the Strait of Bab el-Mandab and the Red Sea. which not only negatively impacts the security and stability of Yemen and the region, but also constitutes a violation of Security Council Resolution 2216 of 2015. The League of Arab States resolution also calls on Iran to cease those acts and all such acts which adversely affect the security and best interests of states in the region, and undertake confidence-building measures with neighbors in the region in order to establish ties based on good neighborliness, cooperation, mutual respect, and non-interference in the internal affairs of states. Mr. President, Excellencies, as I address you from this forum, I consider it a great honor to speak as a representative of the Arab states in the Security Council, conveying the concerns and preoccupations of our peace-loving peoples and their aspirations to security and stability. In this context, the State of Kuwait and all other Arab states reaffirm their absolute faith in multilateral action under the umbrella of the United Nations, according to the objectives, principles, and commitments agreed upon in the Charter. We also emphasize the Arab position on the importance of achieving the universality of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was extended indefinitely after the Review Conference adopted in 1995. It is important to implement the decision to establish a zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. And we reiterate here the Arab position calling upon the three sponsors of the 1995 Middle East resolution to shoulder their responsibilities by implementing that resolution, as it is an integral part of the indefinite extension of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We also emphasize the need for Israel to accede to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and to place all its nuclear facilities under the supervision and monitoring of the International Atomic Energy Agency, especially as it is the only country in the Middle East that has not yet acceded to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Mr. President, in conclusion, the commitment you have shown to confront the challenges posed by weapons of mass destruction is not limited to our meeting here today. It is also to be seen in the current diplomatic efforts to ease tension and achieve denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Those efforts made by you, Mr. President, came within the context of cohesion and unity of Security Council members to counter the illegal programs and activities of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We know that to achieve denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, the road ahead is still long and hard. Yet we believe that the absolute and sincere commitment of all concerned parties, as well as the full implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions, will lead to a lasting and comprehensive peace agreement in a Korean peninsula free of nuclear weapons. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Minister for his statement. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of China.
主席先生，
Mr. President, maintaining global peace and security is the primary responsibility of the Security Council entrusted by the UN Charter and a shared responsibility of all Security Council members. Given the complex challenges to international peace and security, how should the Security Council fulfill this mission and play its role? This is a question that deserves serious consideration. China believes the following. The Security Council should perform its function in a fair and just manner as mandated by the Charter. The Security Council must uphold the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the universally recognized international law and norms governing international relations. It should safeguard the authority and role of UN in international affairs and sovereignty, independence, and legitimate rights and interests of all countries. The Security Council should stick to political settlement as the basic direction. The Security Council should be the strongest advocate for resolving differences and disputes through dialogue and consultation. It should effectively use all tools, including good offices, mediation, peacekeeping, and peace building. Step up preventative diplomacy to serve the larger goal of political settlement. The Security Council should enhance unity to promote consensus. All members must bear firmly in mind their responsibility for world peace and security, enhance unity and coordination, set aside geopolitical considerations, and ensure effective functioning of the Council and uphold the common interests of all UN members. The Security Council should strengthen overall planning and coordination to forge synergy. It should coordinate and cooperate with the General Assembly, ECOSOC, the Secretary General, and the UN Development System so that the political pillar and development pillar can support each other and efforts for lasting peace and for sustainable development can be mutually reinforcing. Mr. President, the proliferation of WMD and their means of delivery poses a real threat to global peace and security and is a challenge that we all face. China proposes that we step up efforts in the following three aspects. First, we need to champion the rule of law to consolidate and improve the international non-proliferation regime. The NPT, the Biological Weapons Convention, the Chemical Weapons Convention, the UN SCR 1540 and other Security Council resolutions constitute the legal foundation of the international non-proliferation regime. All of us should earnestly safeguard the universality, effectiveness, and authority of the non-proliferation regime, and in particular prevent terrorists and other non-state actors from getting hold of WMD materials and technologies. Second, we need to take multi-pronged measures to implement the Non-Proliferation Treaty in a balanced manner. Every country must honor its word, shoulder its responsibilities, and fulfill international obligations. The Non-Proliferation Treaty and agreements must be implemented in their entirety. No double standards, discriminatory arrangements, or selective enforcement should be allowed. Third, we need to bolster international cooperation and enhance all countries' non-proliferation capability. Government bears the primary responsibility of non-proliferation. Countries should be supported in developing their non-proliferation policies in line with national conditions and be encouraged to enhance non-proliferation law enforcement capacity building, carry out more exchanges and practical cooperation so that together we could shore up the shortest plank in a barrel and achieve universal security. Mr. President, the JCPOA on the Iranian nuclear issue is a hard-won achievement of multilateralism conducive to international nuclear non-proliferation regime and peace and stability in the Middle East. There is no international agreement that is perfect. The JCPOA has been endorsed unanimously by the Security Council. What happened in the past 3 years shows that JCPOA is a viable agreement. China encourages Iran to continue to fulfill all commitments it has made. At the same time, the legitimate right of all countries to normal economic relations and trade with Iran should be respected. China calls on the relevant parties to bear in mind the big picture, think long-term, and uphold the sanctity, integrity, and efficacy of the JCPOA. Since the beginning of this year, the situation on the Korean Peninsula has shown major progress. China welcomes that, and China has made unremitting efforts for this to happen. China supports the important common understandings reached between the DPRK and U.S. leaders at the Singapore summit, support DPRK and ROK in improving their relations. We call upon all parties to seize the current opportunities, turn the political consensus into concrete actions, and work in the direction of setting up a peace mechanism on the peninsula and the denuclearization on the peninsula to realize lasting peace on the peninsula at an early date. Mr. President, China lives by its commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, to upholding the UN-centered contemporary international system, and has earnestly fulfilled its international responsibilities and obligations. We need to work together to uphold the efforts to realize peace and security for all. Before I conclude, I need to point out that China has all along followed the principle of non-interference in other countries' domestic affairs. This is a tradition of Chinese foreign policy. Our observance of this principle has received acclaim from the international community. We did not and will not interfere in any country's in domestic affairs. We refuse to accept any unwarranted accusations against China, and we call upon other countries to also observe the purposes of the UN Charter and not to interfere in other countries' internal affairs. Thank you.
Thank the Minister for his statement. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russia Federation.
Thank you very much, distinguished President. Distinguished colleagues, in the world today, effectively combating the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is particularly important for maintaining global and regional stability, for ensuring that we reliably provide for the security of all states without exception. And constructive interaction here is an important element in order to create a positive international agenda. I think that everyone will agree that the Security Council resolution providing for specific measures against those who violate the non-proliferation regime, that this resolution has to be strictly abided by. The cornerstone here is a basic resolution 1540. It contains the obligations of member states to undertake specific measures in order to prevent situations where weapons of mass destruction as components end up in the hands of non-state entities. Of particular importance are also other Security Council decisions pursuant to resolutions providing for sanctions for any kind of transfer of weapons to terrorists. There are facts of such transfers having taken place, and they need to be closely investigated. As was the case 50 years ago when the NPT was opened for signature, so is today. Our country is committed to the goal of ridding the world of nuclear threat. But at the same time, we need to absolutely take into account all of the factors impacting strategic stability. And in the course of negotiations, all countries now participate, all countries which have the nuclear weapons potential. The desire of countries to ban nuclear weapons separately from the basic principles of NPT cannot be successful and will only create ambiguity in our future approaches to weapons of mass destruction, non-proliferation. Since we're talking about NPT, I'd like to mention Resolution 2231, which was approved by the Security Council and which is a joint comprehensive plan of action on the Iran nuclear program. The unilateral withdrawal of the United States from this creates a serious threat for the non-proliferation regime, all the more so since, as this was underscored by many, Tehran is strictly abiding by its commitments within JCPOA, and this is something that the IAEA is regularly confirming. Russia is convinced that we need to keep JCPOA, and this is something that we're actively working on together with Iran, China, and the EU. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we can end up with a situation where there is more tension in the Middle East, and this could lead to risks for national stability and for the non-proliferation regime. The dismantlement of JCPOA would also be counterproductive also for the efforts underway now to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. These efforts is something that we welcome and support. There are also serious obstacles to nuclear non-proliferation, and I am referring to the decision made by the United States to postpone for a long time, perhaps forever, the ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and the absence of progress in implementing the NPT decision to create a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. There is also an alarming situation we're witnessing in the area of chemical disarmament, and this has to do first and foremost with what was done by certain Western countries which keep leveling new unfounded accusations against them, accusing them of using the Syrian authorities substances, and we warn against strikes against the Syrian Arab Republic using a staged pretext. If this were to happen, this would be a gross violation of the Charter and would undermine efforts to foster the political settlement in that country. The government of Syria destroyed all of their chemical arsenal in line with the Russia-US agreement of 2013, and this agreement is enshrined in a Security Council resolution and also in a decision passed by OPCW. But on the other hand, the terrorist groups are entities which have chemical warfare agents. They learned how to synthesize them. They're building labs for that. And this is something that we have been warned about this for a long time by intelligence services of many countries, including the American ones. We have on many occasions offered to help develop a comprehensive strategy on combat chemical terrorism. In 2017, for example, we submitted together with China a draft on such a resolution. It was not considered through no fault of our own. More broadly speaking, at the Conference of Disarmament in Geneva, we submitted a draft convention on combating acts of chemical and biological terrorism. Sadly, the work on this is being artificially blocked, and you, I'm certain, know which countries are blocking that. Nonetheless, the proposals contained therein are on the table. At the same time, there is a deterioration of the situation in OPCW. There, our Western colleagues are trying to impose on its technical secretariat the so-called attribution functions, which is a gross violation of the convention and an infringement on the prerogatives of the Security Council. At the same time, what we're witnessing is an increase in unsubstantiated, highly likely style rhetoric about the Salisbury affair. At the same time, the UK is stubbornly avoiding the joint investigation that we've offered several times, despite the fact that this is part of her commitments in line with the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations of 1963, Bilateral Consular Convention of 1965, and the European Convention on Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Cases of 1959. The question arises, if they do not want to cooperate, well, does this mean that they have something to hide? We call upon London once again to start a constructive dialogue in order to get to the truth. The way things are developing gives us reason to think that nothing can be excluded today, including a provocation involving biological weapons. Given the attempts I just mentioned to manipulate the status of the Chemical Weapons Convention, I'd like to warn against the temptation of using the Convention on Biological and Toxin Weapons for the same end. Let me recall, in line with the convention, the right to initiate and is the right that only belongs with the Security Council. There are no substitutes here. On more than one occasion, we proposed that we agree the mechanism for verification on the Biological Weapons Conventions with all the participants, but the United States blocked this, and ultimately this was completely buried. Such a desire by Washington to have their hands completely free is shown when the regime of the Convention on Biological and Toxin Weapons is undergoing another test, and this has to do with growing military, medical, and biological activity, including in the post-Soviet areas. We call on all not to militarize healthcare. We have consistently called for strengthening the Convention of Biological Toxin Weapons, and we are implementing a number of initiatives here, including creating a number of units to counter epidemics and quickly react to emergency biological situations. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, the dialogue between Russia and the United States as the two largest nuclear powers is of special importance in order to strengthen the WMD non-proliferation regime. Our two states were at the inception of creating the general framework for multilateral cooperation in order to counter the weapons of mass destruction ending in the hands of non-stated entities and countering the acts of nuclear terrorism. We continue thinking that this interaction is of principal importance, not just for Moscow and Washington, but for the entire international community. Let us not sacrifice this on the altar of calculations of the moment of momentary situations. On the basis of the UN Charter, Russia is always ready to work openly with nuclear five states, all other countries, in order to strengthen global strategic stability. And we expect that a step in this direction will be made today at this meeting of the Security Council, which is a key body to maintain maintain international peace and security. And we think that in this regard, the initiative undertaken by President Trump to convene this meeting is very, very timely. Thank you.
I thank the minister for his statement. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia.
Mr. President, heads of states and governments, ministers, we thank the U.S. Presidency for convening this important high-level briefing on non-proliferation. We are very pleased to see you, Mr. President, presiding over this important meeting. Indeed, non-proliferation has been high on the agenda of this Council. It is therefore timely and relevant that we are discussing this issue at the highest level. Mr. President, a few days ago, the world paid a tribute to the late Kofi Annan. In his final UN speech in 2006, he said, and I quote, "Can there be any threat more alarming in today's world than that of a nuclear or biological weapon failing in the hands of terrorists or being used by a state as a result of some terrible misunderstanding or miscalculation? The more states have such weapons, the greater the risk, and the more those states that already have them increase their arsenals or insist that such weapons are essential to their national security. The more other states feel that they too must have them for their security." This is indeed the reality that we are facing today. Indeed, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is posing grave threats to global peace and security, from the DPRK and the Iranian nuclear issues to chemical attack in Syria and Salisbury incident in the UK. Proliferation risks have become one of the most serious challenges of our time. The international non-proliferation regime is under serious challenge, and global anxieties about nuclear weapons are at the highest level since the end of the World War. As Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "We believe it is absolutely vital that we comprehensively address risk of proliferation. There is no other option but to strive to find a negotiated solution to some of the most difficult issues that we are facing at the moment through political and diplomatic means." We have all been observing the developments following the recent summit meeting between you, Your Excellency President, and Mr. Kim Jong-un, whose outcome had given us some sense of hope for the progress towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the advancement of peace in the Northeast Asia. We encourage such endeavors, Mr. President, as we have a first-hand experience solving and bringing peace for the no-war, no-peace situation that existed for more than 20 years between Ethiopia and Eritrea through diplomatic means. Mr. President, we earnestly hope that you will maintain the momentum generated recently with the view to finding a comprehensive, peaceful, and diplomatic political solution to the DPRK issue in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions. This Council needs to continue supporting such endeavors. In this regard, the talk about a follow-up summit is indeed encouraging. We also welcome the outcome of the third Inter-Korean Summit in Pyongyang, and we hope this will lay the foundation for the concrete action towards sustainable peace, security, and complete and verifiable denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions. This Council needs to support the relevant parties to make progress in this direction. In this meantime, we believe the implementation of the sanctions regime continues to be very critical. With regard to Iranian nuclear issue, we remain convinced that the JCPOA represents a significant achievement for multilateralism. We, however, understand the challenges and difficulties in the broader implementation of Resolution 2231. While we reorganize the withdrawal of United States from the JCPOA presents a serious challenge. The commitment of the remaining participating countries is critical for the full implementation of the JCPOA. We hope they will continue to exert every possible effort in addressing the prevailing challenges and contribute to the full implementation of this agreement, which still remains vital for the global non-proliferation architecture. In addressing the proliferation risk posed by non-state actors, we believe the 1540 Committee continues to have a significant role. Strengthening the assistance framework of this committee to member states aimed to addressing the implementation gaps continue to be important in comprehensively addressing the proliferation risk posed by non-state actors, including terrorists. Furthermore, strengthening the collaboration between the 1540 Committee Group of experts and members of the Analytical Support and Sanction Monitoring Team established pursuant to Security Council Resolution 5026 and 2253 concerning Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban and associated individuals and entities requires attention from the Council. Finally, Mr. President, multilateral agreements such as the Biological Weapon Convention, the Chemical Weapon Convention, and the Non-Proliferation Treaty continues to immensely contribute to the prevention and elimination of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. At the time of great proliferation risk, it is in the best interest of all of us to preserve these important multilateral agreements to guarantee our collective safety and security and ensure their full and effective implementation. Let me therefore conclude my remark by reaffirming Ethiopia's unwavering commitment to continue fulfilling its international obligation by taking all the necessary measures to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery into the hands of state and non-state actors, including terrorists, as well as by fully implementing the relevant Security Council resolution in this regard. I thank you.
I thank the Minister for his statement, and I now give the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan.